Ryan Smith is a Shadow Minister for Planning, and he's also been a vocal opponent of the Andrews Pandemic Bill. And now that it's been passed, it could be dark days ahead for Victorians and the state. And Ryan joins us today to talk about what the bill actually means. Welcome, Ryan.
G'day, Michael. How are you?
Good, thanks. Now, the bill, it was passed and there was much fuss made about the 145 amendments. Were any of them of any meaningful change?
No, look, it amazes me that members of the government, particularly in the Assembly, spoke about the bill being a perfect bill. It didn't need any changes, and then it goes through the upper house process, has over 100 changes made to it, and apparently now it's the most perfect bill. So we can't even trust them to give a proper and correct characterisation of it before it even got through the Parliament. How can we possibly believe that it's a good bill now, and how can we possibly believe that they're not going to use it to its full extent?
Now, this wasn't just partisan party politics that was going on with the criticism of the bill. We had the Human Rights Law Centre come out against it. We had Tanya Wolff from the law profession. We had Christopher Bladen QC. We had 60 QCs sign their name to it. There was some fairly heavy hitters with some serious credentials criticising this bill.
Yeah, add in Deborah Glass, the Ombudsman. I mean, it certainly wasn't party politics that made us oppose this bill so vehemently. There were so many different groups, so many different people who were telling Victorians that the bill did not have the proper scrutiny around it, telling people that it gave the government unprecedented powers, in particular Daniel Andrews, who seems to like grasping power at every opportunity. This bill is one that continues to give Victorians uncertainty about lockdowns, continues to give uncertainty to businesses who have had their doors opened and shut so many times over the last 2 years that, too many of them have had to shut their doors permanently, and too much uncertainty to our children who have spent over 250 days out of school in the last 2 years. I mean, this bill is about giving the government the opportunity to do it all again, and it's time, Michael, that we just move on.
Now, some of those opponents of the bill, the non-partisan opponents of the bill, came out and said, well, there were some changes, and they've actually said that while the bill's not perfect, it's an improvement. Well, I would like to see how many people get on a plane with that assessment of it. Well, we fixed it a bit, it's not perfect, but we're going to fly with it anyway.
Look, it amazes me that Rob Barton from Transport Matters, who was the deciding vote for getting this bill through the Parliament, I don't know what he thinks he got out of this bill, but it's actually an indictment on him that he got so little. He claims he's put more scrutiny over it. He claims that it's now two houses of Parliament who are able to scrutinise it. But the reality is, we all know, the government has a large majority in the lower house. The government has, the numbers in the upper house as well, when you include these independents, so-called independents, who have no core values of their own, but are just based on a transactional basis. They just want to get what they can from the government. They don't care where they leave Victorians. And the level of scrutiny that is on this bill, the level of scrutiny that will be on the government when they do things in relation to this bill is meaningless. And the changes that were made really don't do a whole lot and continue to give that uncertainty to Victorians about their future here.
Yeah, and for those who keep saying that, well, Andrews is doing this in our best interest, he's doing the best he can, and we need to give him the benefit of the doubt, I would refer them to Deborah Glass's report on the border closures, where she actually called it inhumane. I think she went on to say they were the worst decisions she'd seen in 7 years, and I think she even said that the border closures seemed like it was more about finding a way to keep people out than a safe way to bring them home. And this is who we're being asked now to just trust him with these unprecedented powers.
Well, you're spot on. I mean, the 6 lockdowns that we've had, the fact that Melbourne's the most locked down city in the world, that doesn't demonstrate policy success. That is an abject policy failure, that the government still thought after 6 lockdowns that it wasn't going to change its policy at all. It wasn't going to get kids back to school. It wasn't going to try to keep businesses open. How can you trust this government? I hear what you're referring to as well, Michael, when people say, oh, well, the government's doing their best to keep us safe. Well, by what measure has this government done well? The most lockdowns in the world, the longest lockdowns in the world, more deaths in Victoria than any other state, kids over 250 days out of school, thousands of business shut, I mean, I shake my head and say, by what measure do you think this government's done a good job? They clearly haven't. And it's clear that other governments in other states have done so much better. The fact that this government still is asking, in fact, demanding that Victorians trust them just makes me shake my head in disbelief.
Yeah, there seems to be a missing moral and ethical consideration to a lot of the decisions that are made, where the impact, they haven't looked forward past the legislation. We're going to do this, right, it's done, but they haven't considered the flow-on effects, the mental health, as you say, the anguish that is caused. When we saw 50 residents die in St Basil's, and then families not able to gather to mourn those people, and now we have the IBAC inquiry into it, and we have the managers saying they don't want to give evidence because they're worried they may incriminate themselves.
Yeah. I mean, this is a government that can't be trusted. We saw the code inquiry that was supposed to give us answers around hotel quarantine deaths. From the Premier down through his ministers, through senior bureaucrats, no one could recall a thing. The contempt that the Premier shows Victorians when we ask questions about all manner of things relating to the pandemic in question time, the dismissive attitude he has, it's just incredible. You can't trust this government to be transparent. You can't trust them to act in the best interests of Victorians. Quite frankly, you can't trust them full stop.
Yeah, we've even had Sven Blumall, the Victorian Information Officer, come out and quote that the FOI system in Victoria is in need of an overhaul.
That's for sure. That's for sure. I mean, he's given the direction the background information behind the Chief Health Officer's directions are released. The government's fighting tooth and nail, using, may I say, taxpayers' money to make sure that the taxpayer can't see the reasons behind the directions. The directions have caused so much, as you rightly say, so much pain and angst and anxiety and stress amongst Victorians. The fact that they're trying to shut that down, what does that tell you about a government? It tells you that they're arrogant. It tells you that they don't care about transparency, and it tells you quite simply they don't care about Victorians.
Now, you mentioned the large majority that the Andrews government have. We're heading into an election next year in November. What's going to change? How will the Liberals change the narrative here or make some ground up?
Well, quite simply, the difference that people will have to decide upon when they come to the election is a government who will give them certainty in the Liberal National Coalition. Certainty because we are saying no more lockdowns. Quite simply, no more lockdowns. We are not going to take your kids out of school. We are not going to tell businesses to throw away stock at the last minute. We're not going to tell people that they can't earn a living. The alternative is to stick with what you've got, which is another year of uncertainty. A government has put legislation in place that gives them the ability to lock us down again. And that, plain and simple, is the biggest difference between a government that Matthew Guy will lead and a government that Daniel Andrews leads. One of certainty and one of uncertainty, continued uncertainty to the Victorian people. The other thing, Michael, is that we want to start putting forward a vision for the future. We've already released policies around bringing manufacturing home, a $2.5 billion fund to get manufacturing kicking again in this state, a fund that will kickstart jobs, investment and business confidence. And we're going to continue to roll out more policies over the course of next year that will show people that we can see Victoria going forward, that our best days are ahead of us, not behind us. That is in contrast to the last 2 years, a government that's given us nothing but doom and gloom, negativity, pessimistic visions for the future, telling people what to do, badgering them. Well, I don't want to be part of that state. I want to be part of a state that looks forward and tells people they have a brighter future, that their kids have a bright future, that the economy will move forward and will experience the sort of prosperity we did after Labor last wrecked our state in 1992.
Now, we can see the disillusionment and the disenfranchisement with politics in general, and through this we're seeing independents starting to carry a lot more weight than what their primary vote should count. And a lot of the preferences that go backwards and forwards, a lot of the backroom deals that actually determine whether your vote is could actually go diametrically opposed to what you want. How do we stop that happening, Ryan?
Well, there's two messages I would give to Victorians. The first is put Labor last. However you vote, put Labor last. But the second one is that a vote for an independent is more than likely a vote for Labor. We've seen the so-called independents vote with Labor so many times. I'm not saying all the independents, but the majority of them, and certainly enough to give Labor the opportunity to do whatever they want. If you want to have a policy, a government who is directly opposed to the current government that we have, the one that's locked us down for 2 years, then you've got to vote for the Liberal or the National Party, because a vote for an independent, I can tell you, as we've seen over the last 2 years, is a vote for Labor. The independents rarely have any fundamental principles. They are transactional. They will vote with the government if they can get what they want out of the government. So they're voting in their best interest, not in Victorians' best interest. So plain and simple, a vote for an independent is a vote for Labor.
All right, well, that's a great way to close it, Ryan. Ryan Smith, Shadow Minister for Planning, thanks for your time.
No worries. Thank you for yours. Cheers.